You mentioned briefly the war in Ukraine. We're coming up on 1 year now. Has your opinion of this changed as you've watched it evolve? And what do people not know about what's really going on there and how that knocks onto Europe, America, and maybe even to China?
Good luck finding any facts. What you're getting is undiluted propaganda and lies orchestrated by the White House and the intelligence community. Russia failed to achieve their initial gains. They didn't get Kiev. They didn't decapitate the regime. They're strung out. They're demoralized. Ukraine's on the advance. They took back Kherson, which is on the Dnieper River. They've made major advances in the eastern part of Ukraine, in the Donbass. They got the U.S. weapons. The Germans are sending tanks to UK. I think your main battle tank is the Challenger. You're going to send them some Challengers, and just keep sending in money and sending in arms and give it time, and we'll take it all back. And Putin will be deposed if he doesn't have cancer already, and we'll even take back Crimea and wave the flag. That's what you hear. The breakdown and collapse of the global supply chain, which preceded COVID. A lot of people say, well, COVID came along. Of course, it messed up the supply chain. The supply chain was breaking down before COVID. Now, of course, COVID made it worse, yes. And the war in Ukraine made it worse yet, yes. But this really started with Trump's trade war in 2018. So that, like I said, there's a thread that runs through all these things. So not to throw out my hands, I'm not going to do that. But when you ask me that, I'm thinking, well, you want to talk about China, Ukraine, supply chain, Biden, they're all a big deal. If in terms of tragedy, probably the war in Ukraine is the most important because it's highly, highly significant economically and strategically. But of course, it's a human tragedy going with it. If Chinese real estate implodes, okay, there's some hardship here and there, but it's not like people being killed or maimed or forced into refugee status. And that is part of what's going on in Ukraine. So that's probably the biggest single one, but I wouldn't miss the fact that all these things are going on at once. With $100 billion, can you just buy a suit or something other than a t-shirt? So, okay, so what's actually going on? Russia's winning the war. They went in with 100,000 troops to conduct something like bigger than a police operation. It was an invasion provoked by the U.S. The U.S. and the U.K. have won at this war since 2008. George Bush gave a speech in 2008. He said Ukraine and Georgia should join NATO. That was the Bucharest Declaration. What happened a couple months later? Putin invaded Georgia, cut the country in half, demolished their military, and they're not joining NATO. Okay, so then come forward to 2014, MI6, the CIA, precipitate one of these color revolutions, Maidan Square revolution. They got some, they're, I don't use the word Nazi lightly, and no one should, but these are neo-Nazi. People in the United States complain, the Federal Reserve has printed $4 trillion in the past year, and they have printed $4 trillion in the last year. They're taking the Fed balance sheet from about 3.5 trillion to 7.5 trillion. So yeah, we printed $4 trillion in the past year. Didn't do any good, won't do any good, but we did it. But China's money supply is even larger and growing faster. Now, I don't want to get into the weeds on China's internal monetary policy. I could, except to say that they're grossly over-leveraged. The economy is investment-driven, not consumption-driven. They're about 45% investment. The U.S. is about 25% investment. So that gives you some idea of how investment is to the Chinese, which is actually okay if you're investing in productive assets that pay the way. They're not. They're wasting the money. I've been to China many times, been going back and forth there for 35 years. I've been out in the countryside. I don't just stick to the hotel lobby in Beijing. I got mud on my boots visiting these ghost cities. And the ghost cities are interesting. I was there one, south of Nanjing, kind of out in the boondocks a little bit. But I was, you always have Communist Party officials with you. They're keeping an eye on you. And so each ghost city, there are a bunch of them, actually seven. Imagine building 7 cities. That's what I saw. And so they got 1 or 2 skyscrapers, shiny new construction, some of it still under construction, all empty. So I said to the communists, I said, what are you guys doing here? I mean, nobody's here. So, oh, don't worry. People will be coming from the countryside. They will be populating these cities. And I said, when? I said, no one's coming. And besides that, you've already drained the countryside. That already happened, 15 years ago. But I said, you cannot mothball a building. China has a long list of its own problems, and I know Australia is very closely linked to China through trade and so forth. The thing with China is this is not their fight. They want to be global hegemons. They want to run the U.S. off the road. They want to replace the U.S. dollar. They have a lot of ambitions. They want to reabsorb Taiwan, but they're also patient. They're also careful. They just wish this would go away. The idea that they're jumping in on the Russia side and going to do everything possible to help Russia. They'll help Russia a little bit. They'll help Russia at the margin in very hard to detect ways, but they're not. They're going to play it down the middle of the fairway. They don't want to. They may want to destroy the U.S. in the long run, but they don't want to antagonize us in the short run. The Russians don't think about the conduct of the war in terms of square miles, like how much land do I have. They think about what resources do we control and what foundation do we have for further gains, and can we make further gains? They think about it much more rationally. So even in the Donbass, which the Russians do control, that's the part you want. The natural resources, the coal mines, the oil, the steel mills, agricultural land, access to the Black Sea, all the stuff you want is in the part that the Russians actually control, including Crimea, with the exception of Odessa, which they don't have yet, but they're working on that. So Kherson waved the flag, yeah, but why fight it? Withdraw. Here come the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians were actually nervous about going in. They're like booby traps or something. All wars are filled with lies and propaganda. That just comes with the territory. Winston Churchill's famous quote was, in wartime, the truth is so important it must be surrounded by a bodyguard of lies, which is exactly right. So Ukraine lies, Russia lies, got it. So the hard part for an analyst is where can I get good information? Where can I get somebody who is actually trying to report? Not easy to do, but there's some good sources. The Swiss, for example, the Swiss, like a nice peaceful country. There's a machine gun under every bed in Switzerland. Every parking lot is a bomb shelter, and this place is heavily armed. Every responsible adult has been in the military. You don't get anywhere if you haven't. But a lot of Swiss military at the colonel level, they'll retire and join like UN peacekeeping forces, and some of them were in eastern Ukraine. So they got some really good firsthand experience, and they care about getting it right. Agence France actually is doing a very good job. Macron has the best dialogue with Putin. I'm not saying he's a fan, but those two guys talk. And Agence France press is a good source. There are other sources, but you got to dig.